Peter Trolove was president of the Federation of Freshwater Anglers and has been instrumental in getting this water testing done around Canterbury. And Peter is a retired vet, or still a vet?
Still registered just.
Still registered. And so Peter's been doing all of this testing. They got some, you can tell us how you do it. And that's been pretty interesting.
Some of our guys be a bit bored because they've heard too much of me, but for the new ones, I sort of got a farming background. I actually grew up on and owned for a brief period a border dike irrigated, part of the border dike irrigated mid-Canterbury farm. I've graduated as a vet in 1974, and midlife crisis, 1988, 89, I went to Scotland, cashed my superannuation, and did a course for fish vets. So, same way you'd service a farm, I was trained to service aquaculture, like fin fish aquaculture, which I never got employed with, which is probably a good thing because it's Tony B. Cross, it's factory farming and water, so it's not doing the environment a lot of good. But and then I also had a slack sort of period in life when I worked as a meat vet. So to fill in time, I did an MBA, which is quite a good civics class. It teaches you how the system works. So a bit of environment, just Cole's notes on environment law and this, that, and politics. So, but generally, I'm a sort of introverted type of person that, a bit of a black shag as a fisherman. I go and fish on my own. I don't tell people how good it is. I go hunting. I don't tell them my best spots. And then suddenly, you're realising that the whole thing's tipping. And so, on the coast, I was asked by the chair of the West Coast Fish and Game Council in 2007 to get on the council because they had a trust power were going to take 4/5 of the Arnold River, or a chunk of it, for a power scheme, and they had these voluminous assessment of environmental effects, and he wanted somebody to work on it. And I thought, well, yeah, okay. He knew I'd done the fish vet course. Let's have a look at this. And the more I looked into the so-called science of water allocation, the more disturbed I became. Because one of the roles of a vet, we sort of use science and at the sharp end and make it work for things. And one of our roles is that of an information broker. So we sort of have a bit of an informal training on working out what's the guts of advertising literature, peer-reviewed journals, or sort of popular news, so that we could advise the farmers, in our opinion, what's the sort of guts of what you should be doing and what's just some advertorial. And the problem, why we're in trouble, in my opinion, is we're too tight to spend money on comprehensive studies, so we use models. So water allocation from rivers, we use a model called river hydraulic simulation. It actually can never be verified or validated. It can be shifted across depending on who's paying you to get the result that you want. And it's largely been discounted. I got a lot of North American literature because they're ahead of us in polluting and stuffing their rivers, and I contacted a nice guy in Davis in California who'd been out here, and fish biologist, and he was very generous with papers and things, and he reassured me that I was on the right track. So with that background, I'd come back to Canterbury. I was still on the coast, and you had the Christchurch earthquakes. And right when everybody's on the back foot, the key government produced this ECAN Act that Tony referred to, which gave statutory primacy to the Canterbury Mayoral Forum's Canterbury Water Management Strategy. Now, the Canterbury Water Management Strategy is no more, no less than a non-statutory drought plan from a drought in Canterbury in 1998. So if you read the Canterbury Water Management Strategy as the Canterbury Irrigation Strategy, everything becomes clear. So we went from 260,000 hectares of irrigated Canterbury roundabout in 2010 to 500,000 hectares of irrigated Canterbury more or less now, and that jolly water management strategy is aiming to do 1.3 million hectares of Canterbury. So where do you conjure the water from? You can't mine things and not have an effect. And worse, when the 2012 hearing to amend the Rakaia Water Conservation Order was taking place, everybody knew that the out-of-river use of water would cause this massive nitrate pollution of Canterbury's aquifers. And Eugenie Sage was a elected Green councillor, and she was deposed under the Act. She was 207 to 210. She wrote a submission, which somehow came across my desk, dated, received, ECAM, but she didn't follow it through. But it talked about this. So I presented that among my other wider submission at this 2012 ECAM hearing, and the chair of the Independent Commission said, well, this is a hearing to change the river flows. The out-of-river use of this water will be subject to another hearing, which wasn't logical, because if you're going to spend $200 or $300 million putting in place an irrigation scheme, you're not actually going to say no when you come to use it. But this is the way the game is played. They'd allocated 57 cubics of water from the Rakaia River first, knowing that the existing conservation order wouldn't let them have it. So then they have another hearing to take the water. The whole logic of the Lake Coleridge project is a sort of mirrors bloody scheme of inventing water out of nothing. It's a very clever, I suppose, Russell McVeigh or government lawyers, some sort of people, whichever they are. You know, we're going to store water in Lake Coleridge. Effectively, they're using Lake Coleridge as a dam, even though you can't dam the river. So they've got this very complicated formula where they're pretending to take the top off floods. But nobody wants the floods. There's Canterbury Regional Council consents telling them, whether they obey or not, that they can't stick mega silted water into Lake Coleridge because it has clarity issues. I think that gets ignored. And then the power scheme at Lake Coleridge has been putting the river back, more virtually flow of river, since November 1914 when the power station kicked off. Suddenly the water that flows through the Coleridge, which is about 40-45% of the catchment, becomes stored water under an artificial formula which a utility company sells to irrigators. With water we don't, you know, that John Key says no one owns. So I think I did quite well on the science of this hearing. So one of the commissioners died. The trespass experts, witnesses that had the opportunity to do the rebuttal of evidence, I'd given this flow modelling thing a bit of hammer, so I got personally attacked. Their experts said that they didn't believe Mr. Trolove would have seen trout spawning in deep cut holes with upwelling water in the North Rakaia, and I've got Celtic blood and freckles. So instead of making my submission about what I know, we had to come back again and resubmit our original submissions, or they didn't count, and that's where I think Eugenie dropped the ball. So I did that, but then I was working full time. I attacked each and every one of these expert witnesses, but I couldn't get it typed in time, so I sort of had to do it from my own rough notes. But basically, I was able to sort of say, well, so-and-so spent a year trying to capture fish with the electric fishing machine each month. And some months he's got none, and some he's got a handful. Basically, all he's proved is that his battery-powered electric fishing machine is not effective as a generator one. Right, we've got the guy with his diploma of recreation from Lincoln University, and he's done a fair dinkum trial of anglers. Hang on a minute. He flew over the show on a plane. His 100 anglers, 40% of them are first-time anglers. Do you think that might be a bias sample? If I start fishing, I stay fishing. The whole thing. Oh, and then I used my sort of aquaculture water quality training. You see now, if you are going to farm fish, you've got to have deep pockets. You've got to have millions and millions of dollars to set up your facility, get your fish, feed it, and wait 3 years before you harvest a crop. It's not something that you and I can go and do. It's Unilevers and BP and pop stars country. And so, I said, well, okay, you're taking a big chunk of water out of the river, you're going to change the water temperature. You guys have not looked at water temperature. Muldoon wanted to do the Central Plains water as one of his think projects, and the Ashburton and North Canterbury Climate Society's got it knocked back, and that's why they got the conservation order. But in the days when we had public good science, Muldoon got all these government departments to do some science. So the only fair dinkum science we had was back from the end of the 70s, early 80s. And there was one definitive paper, Duncan and Glover, 1985, where the power companies actually turned on and shut off the water going out of Coleridge and Highbank so they could actually see what happened on a braided river, because the hydrology and measuring of the physical water was too complicated to get accurate figures. Then we had biologists looking at the braided river for probably the first time and saying, hell, as we speak today, they've got such a small number, and only 7 or 8 years have disappeared, that Niwa, Dock, Ecan and Fish and Game went netting in November and February of this year, and they didn't find enough stockle smelt to put together a study. It's spectacular. And so I go to my river now, if I take a fishing rod, it's to catch a fish to do an autopsy. But I don't feel good about keeping fish anymore. And I've gone from a black shag not telling anybody what I'm up to because I'm having it so good to being president of the Federation of Freshwater Anglers. So that's my sort of sport and recreation. But while I sort of on this bit of a kick, Dr. Mike Joy, he'd helped me out with my Arnold River understanding of the science, and I had a loose contact. Dr. Alison Jews is a vet who's a farm advisory group that knows about the nitrate leaching and overseer. She uses the tool. That sort of kept me informed. And so Mike asked me, Fish and Game actually did something for once. They got Mike to come down to Christchurch to test rural well water samples, because Mike had worked out that society doesn't apparently give a toss about freshwater environments, but they are a wee bit worried about bowel cancer and public health. So Mike had won a environmental prize of about $30,000, and he selflessly chucked the bulk of that into buying this Trios optical nitrate sensor, where he could accurately measure the amount of nitrate in the water. And science keeps moving along all the time. So even though New Zealand has a maximum allowable value of nitrate in drinking water of 11.3 milligrams per litre, that is actually the toxic level that kills babies if you mix milk formula with it. There's no margin. And anyway, it's out of date, because researchers hardening up the evidence to show that Canterbury and Southland got the highest rates of colorectal cancer in the world, and it's hardening up the fact that if you drink water with high nitrate, you absorb it in your mouth because it's water rather than the cured meats which goes to your stomach and gets acted on by acids and a whole lot. That you're getting these nitrosomes, these cancer-forming, cell-mutating form of nitrate from your drinking water. So when I got involved with the Federation, I thought, well, let's copy Mike. It's a bloody good idea, and Canterbury's the front line of water pollution on the nitrates. So Pub Charities New Zealand, thankfully, fronted up, and so the federations acquired their own trial sensor like Mike's. So for 22 months, I've been doing a monthly run across the Selwyn water zone, measuring the surface water for our fish. Now the Selwyn River, for this 10 months of this last second year, the water's coming out of the ground at 9.8 milligrams per litre nitrate N. The Australian-New Zealand standard of how much nitrate, where it starts affecting the aquatic system, is 0.44, and the standard that Mike Joy and 14 other of the 19 scientists on the Ministry of Environment Scientific Technical Environment Group decided would be appropriate to protect 90% of the freshwater organisms, like that's writing off 10%, is 1.0. So, but from a sort of enlightened self-interest point of view, as a fisherman, I've found peer-reviewed papers that says that salmonid eggs and fry don't survive chronic exposure in water of 3.5 to about 6 milligrams per litre, depending on other water quality parameters. So, Steve Jarrett, who's on our group, and myself have noticed, first we saw the little fish disappearing from the Haynes and Selwyn rivers, then the bigger fish, and then there's none. Because you've got to breed to sort of keep the population going. You know. But then we've used that nitrate thing, copying Mike a little bit in the community. So the first time we went down to Ashburton, which is my parents on the edge of Ashburton, their farm, or what's left of it, and there's a real legacy nitrate problem because we've had the big Fiat and lamb chain in different places, not near a river, so they tip their works waste into soak pits. And they've done it since the 1880s. So anybody who's around the north of Ashburton is drinking water that's at or above the MAV. And then because we did that, the Mike Glover, who's on a Selwyn water protest group, got me to do 60 or 70 samples in Springston South. And while one or two cases don't necessarily mean anything in an experiment, it was disturbing to hear when you got the farmer from Norwood or this guy or that guy, and they've got nitrate levels up and above 10 and sometimes over the 11.3, saying quietly, yeah, I got gut cancer, or yeah, I got a family member with cancer. You think, shit. and yet, from our central and regional government, it's a $1.3 billion economy. So what? And so I had the exercise. I'd done all the tests, last year, and I thought, well, I've worked as a meat vet. I know about being a bit sniffy with regulatory. So I reported the degraded river to Environment Canterbury. I didn't get a reply. So when I was getting my truck serviced, I took my report in and said, can you date and stamp it received, please? As I walked off to the dock office to do something similar, the phone went off and the guy said, oh, yeah, just found your email, sorry, we're onto it. But he wasn't. So I'd got to know Jenny Huey from this sort of stuff. She's actually quite available and she wants to do the right thing, but she's in an impossible situation really, because we don't have the means to manage diffuse nitrate pollution, and that's the long and short of it. So she said, we're talking to another fishing group, would you like to come in on an afternoon in early October and do your thing? So I rocked in there, and I wasn't going to tell them about nitrate or educate people. I just said, well, this river is 4 times the Ministry for the Environment's national policy statement for freshwater management objectives of 2.4. The river is degraded. National policy statement freshwater management says when a river is degraded, you must do 1, 2, 3, 4. And I said, so that's why I'm here, and I'd like a report for our federation. Oh, we can't do that today. Of course you can't. Take a month. Well, that was in October. I still hadn't had the report. But did I get a circular bit of avoidance? Oh, well, Peter, says Jenny, we're governance, and it's up to the staff to deliver these outcomes. So I've invited the staff. Now, would they like to ask any questions? Then we had 6 or 7 councillors, because we've only returned to full democracy in November 2019, sort of said, well, don't pick on us, Pete. We're new. It's not our fault. Okay. And then another councillor sort of started being a bit evasive, so freckles, I sort of got up here a wee bit and got ticked off. And then one of the farmers, who's obviously got a, pecuniary interest in the whole bloody thing, got quite red in the face. He said, well, Peter, he said, I've been on the water zone committee since the beginning, and I've done a hell of a lot of work, and we've made a lot of trade-offs, and in a democracy you don't always get what you want. And I said, yeah, you can be having your trade-offs over here, but nature is nature, and unless you're relevant, you're wasting your time. So we've got, Canterbury is the front line of nitrate pollution in fresh water, and the front line of over allocated water, because our lowland rivers, trout won't survive, and so who knows what else is not surviving. I think the cora, the bloody freshwater mussels, all the other stuff are going to be in trouble. But when I do my water testing, the once permanent drains and springs across the Selwyn water zone dry out. The Earl River's been dry since December. It used to be a good trout river, it's still dry. The other drains, if they've got any water in them at all, you can't see the water for macrophytes. These are the plants that live in the fertigation that's coming down. So they're lovely dark green growing gangbusters because of the nitrate pollution. And then in this corporate cowboy country, DOC has entered a $20 million project with Lou Sanson and Fonterra to save our fresh water. So the catchment they're saving in the Selwyn water zone is the L2 or Hodson's River. It's got nothing to do with dairy farms. It's an old watercourse that goes underground from the Waimak, pops up in Lincoln Township and flows into the lake. So I can go to Liffey Springs where the water's coming out of the ground, and it's 3.52 milligrams litre nitrate, which is still too high. And then go down near the lake, and it'll be about 3.2. And it's got absolutely nothing to do with the signs, the fences, the livingwaters.org website, the pictures of dock girls and gumboots. It's purely the bloody plants and the weed in the river that's sucking up the nitrate and that length of river. So basically in this country at the moment, we don't have anybody sorting out this problem, and we don't have anybody apparently who's interested. And yeah. So the Federation, I wound up the meeting with Jenny and said, oh, well, you guys might be doing nothing, but we're going to keep testing. So that's about where we're at.
Brilliant. Wow. Okay, so I haven't talked about water much, but I've actually done quite a lot of work in water in the past, and it's really interesting because I totally resonate with your story. I studied biochemistry and microbiology, and then I studied to be a health protection officer. And in those days, we did all kinds of things, including water quality and swimming pool quality and all sorts of environmental issues, and I thought it was all pretty interesting and cool. But the obvious thing was that nobody actually enforced all the laws. And that was in 1983, I think. And I don't think anything has really changed since. When I studied law, one of my honours papers that I did was environmental enforcement. Well, I should have called it environmental lack of enforcement. And my lecturer thought it was the most amazing paper he'd ever seen, because I actually went out and talked to all these groups, because I kind of knew quite a few of the people anyway, but I pulled together all this actual information about what wasn't happening. So it's just been a travesty for a long time. When I worked for DOC for 2 years, in those days it was good. We actually did advocacy. We were actually allowed to do advocacy on water back in when was it, 2006 to 2008, just before they stopped us doing advocacy. So I was involved for DOC with the Trustpower Wairau application to take water, the Buller Water Conservation Order, and quite a few like vineyard applications in Marlborough. What became really obvious was the whole, like you say, I mean, they basically allocate water because people want water, but they don't look at how much water there is to allocate. So they had all these models about how much water there should be, and they allocate like 5 times more. And it's like, well, hang on, you can't do that. So, oh, well, nobody takes all the water that they're allowed to take. But that's not the point. If you're telling them that they can, you can't allocate more than what there is, because especially then, what are you going to do when they do upscale and you've got to tell them that they can't do it anymore? I mean, the whole thing is so wrong.
The cynical thing in the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, they divided Canterbury into 10 zones where it's called community collaboration. So you load up your committee with water users, chuck in a couple of token people like me, use peer pressure to make these people behave, and a confidentiality agreement that says you can't say what you've been talking about. And that's called community consultation.
Yeah.
And then these guys in my Selwyn zone, they had I've got people drop things off their desk at me these days, which is good. So I've got a report which ECAN commissioned to look at the performance of the Selwyn Water Zone, December 2020. They haven't set an environmental standard. The standard for nitrate in the water in that region is 8.5. You know, they haven't monitored the levels. But gee, they've done a lot of irrigation.
Yeah. With the Buller Water Conservation Order, one of Tally's factories, Majak, wanted to take water for their own power scheme, I think it was.
It's off the Gowan, isn't it?
Yeah, off the Gowan, right? And so I was acting for DOC, and Marie was acting for Fish and Game. So we were a pretty good team in those days. But the stunning thing was, you know, the industry took the view that, well, yes, there was a water conservation order to protect the natural values of the river, but that was really just until they wanted to take the water. But we actually, because we had a good team, we convinced the Environment Court judge that that wasn't what it should be, like a national park. You should protect it. If it's got a water conservation order, it's got to be durable. There's no point going through the whole process to get a water conservation order until they don't want it anymore. The irony of the whole thing, that they employ experts who they already know are going to give the answer that they want to give, right? There's no science, they choose them. They had 2 engineers on that project for Majak. This is all public information sitting in court. The first one, Marie from Fish and Game asked a really good question. How many of these, when did you last do one of these, a scheme like this? When I was an apprentice in 1963, I helped on a job, right? That was their first engineering witness. The second engineering witness, he was the expert on water takes, and the community was, why are they trying to take the water from there, from this corner? There's no water in the corner, in the river, right? So how many times have you been to inspect the river? Oh, once. Well, when was that? Whatever date. Oh, well, that was during a major flood, yes. So he had redesigned the water take during this major flood based on what he'd seen, but 99.9% of the time there wasn't even any water there. You know, this is the idiocy of what we're dealing with.
This is the way they play it. Like with the Rakaia, you've got the mean flow of the Rakaia River is 220 cubics. The average flow is 150 cubics. To an angler, the actual real bloody flow is 40 cubics where I'm fishing. You know, and if you've spent your tens of millions on your fish farm, you're not You go broke if you think like that. You've got automatic temperature recorder going the whole time, you've got dissolved oxygen monitoring going the whole time, and you've picked a site where you've got water quality where nitrates are not above 1, coming into the bloody thing 365 days of the year with alarms going off in 5 minutes if something stopped. If it's a shore facility, they don't have one pump pumping the water, they have 3 pumps. One is backup, and one is backup for the backup, because if it turns to shit, you've lost a lot. And yet, we're so casual about what we've got.
Yeah, it's not the average that you look at, it's the bad day that kills everything. Yeah. But they don't look at it like that. It's just nuts. I also helped the farmer in Marlborough whose dam basically fell down in the sudden earthquakes. And that was another just disaster zone. We identified before the earthquakes that there were major engineering problems with the dam. And I'm talking about this because it's the same engineers that designed the Waimea scheme. We told the council, these engineers, there is a problem. You've got to make sure you work this out properly because there is a problem. We went to the Marlborough District Council with the ones in Seddon before the earthquake and said, look, there are 10 or something critical hold points for this dam design that must be checked off before the dam can go through. I think 3 of them they hadn't done at all, the engineers. 3 of them they'd sort of partially done, but not part of what needed to be done. And the rest of them they'd sort of half-baked done. But when you looked at it, you could see it was a disaster. But guess what? Marlborough District Council, no, you're not an engineer. We don't have to listen to you. By then we were in court against the engineers, and the council would still listen to the engineers that were in court for doing a bad job, rather than listening to anybody else. Every single level of everything fails. The system fails. And then when the earthquake came, guess what? The dam collapsed basically, or didn't like half collapse, but had a big problem because it was only the water in the dam that was holding it up. So we had to de-water it really, really slowly because the more you took the water out, the more it collapsed. So they had like 4 or 5 major massive earthworks things lowering it as fast as they could, but to still be safe. And Seddon was on standby downstream, that if everything went wrong, Seddon had 15 minutes to evacuate before the flood came down. But it's just like, it's all just so casual. And, you know, we had to get an engineer from London because none of the engineers in New Zealand would say anything bad about the other engineer because they were all working for them because of the Christchurch earthquake. Because because I think it was Jerry Brownlee had employed one engineering firm that he had a relationship with to do the whole geotech study in Christchurch. You know, it's just...
Even the Apua Dam, for example.
Same engineering firm.
It's starting to leak, but they've got engineers saying it's okay. But from an angler's point of view, they're taking the water out of the bottom of the lake. So it's in a sheltered little valley, there's not enough wind to turn over the water. So the water that's coming out of that is anoxic, toxic water. So there's nothing growing in the first handful of kilometres of downstream bloody river because the water's got it's not life supporting. You know, it's...
Yeah, and what you said about modelling, I came to exactly the same conclusion with modelling. Just with modelling, you know, you can make a paper aeroplane or you can spend 10,000 hours making a model plane, right? They're both models, but one is a much more accurate model than the other. Exactly what they do with all this modelling for river flow. Somebody makes up some formula and then all of these $1 million decisions are made based on the formula, but not just $1 million decisions, things that affect the whole environment and the whole future of all the life in the river. And nobody even seems to be saying, oh, actually, is there any validity to the model?
Well,
so,
I mean, that's like in Canterbury, we've got river hydraulic simulation, we've got aquifer sim, and we've got overseer. And they're all the bloody same. They're very useful and very legitimate to manage complex information, to give concepts. But as Sue says, these clowns are using the answers from the models as facts. And
Not
they could be
assumptions.
100% out.
Anyway, we should be giving you guys a chance.
Sorry.
Look, I don't even know why I'm here, but we're on the Federation of Freshwater Anglers, here to support Peter. He's a champion of Canterbury water, you know, with all the testing and everything he's found out. I'm more of a broad scale guy. I mean, my father Stuart and I formed the Outdoor Recreation Party back in 2002 with the help of a whole lot of people, huge number of people, and it's actually fun coming along today and listening to all the things because you know, the same issues, in fact they got worse. You know, we were all about the sort of erosion of rights, resources and opportunities, and all the issues that we was, you know, the 1080 poison, the saltwater fishing, saltwater fishery mismanagement, freshwater. But you know, these issues have actually got worse. You know, and I've been fortunate, I guess, in my career. I was a university boy, a couple of degrees, master's research thesis, and I've worked as a guide overseas, and I've been a fishing guide in the tourism industry for 36 years. Now I'm a water filter man. I sell water filters, you know, and I'm sort of like Darth Vader. I've turned to the dark side, you know. The more poison and polluted the place gets, the more water filters I'm going to sell. You know, it's really fucked up. But you know, I've always been an outdoor man, and hats off to you guys with the outdoor party. I mean, these issues aren't going to go away. It's going to take forever, and I'm committed to doing my part with these fine gentlemen here, the Federation of Freshwater Anglers. We're doing what we can. It's not easy, under-resourced. You know, it's challenging work. So hats off to all you guys. I mean, I know a lot about freshwater. I could tell you all sorts of stuff, but we all know the doom and gloom. We're just joking with David. You know, we got any razor blades? You know, but you know, our fundamental rights, resources, our who we are as New Zealanders is at stake here. You know, the loss and our rights being taken off us is very, very worrying to me. So great to see you all. Thanks. David's going to have a spiel here.
I'm not going to say much. You've all been very patient listening. I'm David Haynes. Alan and I sat in his living room in 2015 with Bryce Johnson, who is Chief Executive of Fish and Game, the fantastic Scott McIndoe, who runs Legacy, and Grant Dixon of NZ Fishing News, and we said, let's form a political party. And here it is now. And so, yeah, hats off to Sue, hats off to all the candidates, and see the membership growing is great. This is all bad news, we all know it, but I get quite philosophical after having done this for a couple of decades now. I'm still a new kid on the block compared to Sue and probably most of you, but what I take from this is, first off, nothing worth doing comes easy, okay? And the taste of success is that much sweeter when you have to work bloody hard for it, and that's what we're all about here. And I believe that I don't believe in collaboration, and I don't believe in compromise. I believe in fighting. I believe in being dirty when you're fighting, but always be polite and always keep your doors open, and they're not mutually exclusive. So that's what it is, whether we're blessed or cursed. But the idea is these are monumental things that we all care passionately about and really have to fight tooth and nail and the rest for. But do it. We're compelled to do it. We have no choice. Sit on our arse and let it all wash over us, and only complain when somebody takes our toys away from us. We can stand up and fight what we're doing. So hats off to you. And you know, we all stand on the shoulders of giants. So thank you, guys. Thank you.
Peter, David, do I understand that there's a river around here that's up in the 12 parts per million or something like that in Nelson?
Oh, no, there is. Look, I was for my sins. I was a Tasman District Councillor back in 2010 to 2016.
It gets darker every minute.
I was at a public meeting and I told that these guys were yelling at me. I told them they could call me any name they liked, beginning with the letter C, as long as it wasn't councillor. But no. I was the council elected representative on the Waimea Freshwater Land and Advisory Group, and so look, there are some serious issues out there. There's some polluted plumes dating back to the 1950s with historic pig farming. The guys, to save money, you're supposed to have a special mixer to mix the fertiliser into the water. They used to just dump the sacks of urea straight down the well holes, and so they contaminated things. So what's interesting to me is that we hear all this about pollution, but I would argue that there's a huge tsunami of pollution coming our way that no one's really even thought about, because the pollution that we were seeing there is, and it's on the Waimea Plains now, is from historic land use patterns that up to not 1950s. What's that, 70 odd years ago or something, isn't it? So heaven help us, really. And I know on the Tasman Plains they've got increasing problems because vegetable growing, just different land practices. So there's all these enrichment. Allegedly has one of the highest rates of nitrates of any town reticulated council supply water system in the country. So
your filters are on a good mission.
Yeah.
But it's just, look, it's concerning to me because we're already drinking water, like, what is it, 1 milligram you were saying that fish can't survive. So in Richmond, we're drinking water that fish can't fornicate in now, so there's some serious issues out there, and you can bleat on and on and on about them, but what are we going to do, and you guys are good on you, good on you.
Well, what we are going to do, and we've been talking about this, is that we're going to extend that nitrate testing that's been going on in Canterbury down here, because having talk and battled with Tasman District Council over a number of things, the extent of water quality monitoring is very, very scant in Tasman. So if you look at our major rivers that abut intensive agriculture, so the Mar, Taki, large stretches of the Buller, the Maruia, and all the other watersheds, they don't test any of them. In fact, in 425,000 kilometres of running water in New Zealand, we've got 1,500 water quality monitoring stations. And so we had the Freshwater Scientists Society and Cawthorne Institute and other scientists say, actually we need about 6,000 to 10,000 to even get any idea about how our water's performing. So 1,500, 425,000 divided by 1,500 is a lot of kilometres per testing station. And Tasman are really bad at it. So we will do it.
Yep.
So,
don't be too hard on Tasman though, because this is a nationwide problem.
Yes.
I got to defend Tasman. I was a councillor, But these are widespread problems, and I read all the fishing magazines from around the world, and I'm just reading in the British fly tying and fly fishing magazine talking about all these issues, and they've got hell of a problems there too. It's not unique to us.
Yeah, except saying the EU have had the equivalent of good management practice and regulations since 1991. And they did an audit in 2018, and the average European river, and I would have thought Europe's had enough time to pollute, is 4. And yet we can run the Selwyn River at bloody near 10 in no time. I mean, the Central Plains water was only signed off in October 2018, for God's sake.
Yeah. And then we've got things like Marlborough with the copper chrome arsenic from the Tanalised vineyards, like so many vineyards, everyone leaching out a little bit of copper chrome arsenic.
I can recall the Council of the Acclimatisation Society in the 70s telling the Hawke's Bay Regional Council they'd over-allocated the Naroa River. And they just kept allocating, and now I think they're saying there's a 5 or 10 times over-allocated one river.
I think the Rangitata is my favourite for bloody idiocy, because I think one of your guys here lives in Nelson, Andrew Fenimore, who's an independent commissioner. He's written papers on integrated catchment management, where you see a river from the Alps to the bloody near shore seawater, and yet the Rangitata Conservation Order, holders boulders protected until you get the irrigation intakes, and then 80% of the water is put onto farms. None of the fish traps work. Yeah, and I think if they wanted to, if they wound it down, they can take that river down to 15 cumecs. Well, Canterbury University tell us that the river won't open to the sea with any great guarantee, less than about 40. 70% of our native fish have the sea in their life cycle coming or going.
Just a matter of aside, I was a young man on the Acclimatisation Society councils in the 70s, and the older ones were talking about they were going to do these water conservation orders because it had just become a part of the law. And we were voting the money for them, and they said to me, they won't catch on for a long time and, until they want to use these rivers, and by then we'd have got these conservation orders on and that they'll be buggered. And I remember not long ago, somebody up in the North Island was on the Mohaka River, one hydro company going, why can't we dam the Mohaka? And it's from decisions made in the 70s. It's been an amazing thing. I don't know if you know, these water conservation orders basically put a national park status on the river.
That was the scunginess of the ECAN Act, Environment Canterbury Temporary Commissioners, an approved Water Management Act 2010 of John Key. Chris Todd got the ministerial discussion papers. So MPI sat down with the inner cabinet of National Party. How can we double New Zealand's GDP? Oh, we'll do it through dairying, we'll do it through irrigation. Well, what's the barriers? Water conservation orders.
Yeah.
So the ECAN Act retrospectively removed Canterbury's protections on our conservation orders. In theory, they are national parks. In theory, it takes government to reverse them. But the Canterbury conservation orders were handed down for a bloody regional council to determine the fate of a river. And the hearing that I presented my material, all Trustbearer had to do was pay for a few people prepared to say under oath, basically on expert opinion with no damn science whatsoever, that would stand up peer review in the Environment Court, because they removed the Environment Court, to stand up and say, this will have minor or less than minor effects, is the legal phrase.
Yeah.
I put the money in my pocket, thanks, job done.
Well, I just, my mind keeps flashing back to all those old timers on the old clubs, the Society Council saying, don't worry, Alan, they won't wake up for it for a while. I thought, yeah, I was too young to understand what I did there. This is a bit like the 1080 issue, is that the great unwashed don't actually understand what's going on. And I reckon this is the problem. We need to be taking the fight to the ordinary people. Now, I'm just going through my mind here, the way I would fight this would be for your machine to come here, go, right, this water here in Richmond is X. And then Jim Hilton and these signs on the lampposts everywhere tell the people that they're drinking poison and what the effects will be with cancers and all the rest. So people are walking on the street go, I didn't know that we had 9 parts per million of
But Alan, it's been, you know, like good idea, but it's all that stuff's been in the paper. It's you can read it on the council website. You know the rate of you know. So
But
I don't know how you get the message out.
You need it sitting in the urinals and like standing
Then Alan, you'll get Ian McKenzie, who's got a big chunk of land in mid Canterbury with irrigated dairy farm and crop. ECAN regional councillor, and he goes to the Ashburton Guardian, which is the centre of irrigation, third highest user of electricity in New Zealand, putting water up in the air to get evaporated. And he writes an advertorial, or sits down with a reporter, and they write an advertorial completely debunking what we've had at a public meeting 3 days before, saying that we're being, you know, extremists, we don't know what we're talking about in our science is crap, and we don't have enough knowledge to understand environmental issues. We have the Mayfield Haynes Villetus irrigation consents, 50-odd thousand hectares of the Rangitata Haynes Plains, before an independent commissioner rolled over for another 10 years. We were shut out of public consultation because of the laws that they put in place to shut us out in 2010. And then the argument that ECAN had was, well, we've gone from this shocking flood, water diet irrigation, which 60-70% of the water goes past the root zone, and that's causing nitrate leaching, and we're going to precision irrigation where we're not going past the root zone. Then this year they've had a peer-reviewed paper published which found on the Rangitata Haynes Plains, because most of the dairy farms are sucking the water out of the aquifer, that the aquifer's dropped 17 metres and the nitrate level's gone up 2 or 3 times. So the whole argument, and that was the argument for Central Plains water, well, we're taking alpine water as if it's magically conjured out of nothing, and we're using it to irrigate Central Plains, which will raise the aquifer, and yet 30% of the streams I'm monitoring are dry at the moment. So, and then Tim Davies, ECAN's Director of Science, gets up there and says, oh, it'll get worse before it gets better, and this is legacy, and it was farming practices 30 years ago. And that's what we get.
Well, you've given me a good idea, because we get the same, we're all conspiracy theorists, whether we're talking about vaccines or radiation or poison or water or anything. If we can all unite forces, and actually, I don't think you look that nuts, and hopefully none of the rest of us do either. On the one side are the people that are getting done over and trying to raise the red flag and say, oh, what's going on here? We're not nuts. And if we can somehow flip their narrative over, everything comes back to normal again. It's just that what's been happening is everyone's fighting each other. What we need to do is we're all on the same team, which is why I wanted to sit with you, because we're all talking actually the same thing, but with a slightly different version of it. And so that's the thing. It's not which one's more important. It's they're all super important. We do one, and everyone else supports with it, and then we build from there.
Well, sadly, I've got involved with the family coordinator to do an affidavit before a lawyer, and he said, oh, you bloody people, adults acting like kids. So I got sick of family court. I'm an environmental lawyer now. Oh yeah. So this is interesting. I said, I like science, and I'm getting pissed off because it seems that environment outcomes are determined in law. Exactly.
But that's where we've got to change it. We've got to have people's commissions of inquiry. See, we've had the same problem with this vaccine thing. We found a legal argument, it's a really good legal argument, and we should win it. But it still doesn't actually address the big thing about are vaccines good for us, or all of the real questions. The court is not the right place to sort that, and is very, very carefully designed that there is no right place to sort it, you see? So there's nowhere you can go. It's not because we're not looking right, it's just that it's carefully designed that you can't challenge it anywhere.
I'll go back to your point about sort of uniting groups, because one thing that's with Peter's work on nitrate testing around Canterbury is that besides getting an awful lot of publicity, which is probably a more powerful theatre than the court and dealing with politicians, we've got Aotearoa Water Action involved, and we've got Save Our South Island Rivers who've come on board. We've got Greenpeace now offering to test people's water, care of Federation's facilities, and we've got Extinction Rebellion along with us as well. So we've got these groups that we wouldn't normally think would they be associated with, sort of crusty old anglers like us, but we're all in the same walker on this, and it's pretty powerful, and it's all because of, I think, not only quite a compelling thing about, are we giving ourselves colorectal cancer, but I think it's about positive action, isn't it? We're doing something positive. We're not standing on a touchline going, yeah, it's shit, oh, you're rubbish, oh, it's wrong, oh, it's bad. Actually doing something positive. And it's really growing, and we're more and more sticking together in more and more groups just by physically doing stuff. So
but I think you've got to keep it simple too, and you've got to focus. And if there's one bit of advice I could give you guys all here today watching is that, you can try to be everything to everybody, but I think you've got to keep it simple and probably really focus and pick your issues, the ones you can really get good resonance on. I mean, after the 2002 election result, we were devastated. We thought we were going to Parliament, and everybody said they'd vote for us, but they couldn't at the end because they were all, what was in their back pocket or whatever. And there's this United States cartoon character called Pogo, and he had this great line, and it was, we have met the enemy, and they is us.
Yeah.
And all these groups, we had massive problems when because I was the media spokesperson for the outdoor outdoor recreation New Zealand party, I think is what it was called, and it was like herding cats, and some of the groups and the infighting and trying to unite. And Alan and Sue, you've seen all this before, but it's hell of a hard, and so when you get it all figured out, tell me how to do it.
That's why we've got Amanda here to talk to us, exactly.
Segues us into Amanda.
She's here with the answers.
I've got 3 questions for Peter. First one, in your position as a roving vet, have you seen a nitrate affected cow?
Oh, well, we do. I mean, but that's where a plant's stressed and accumulates nitrate. So, say on the west coast where I was working, you'd get cloudy weather.
Yep.
So there's no photosensitivity, so the nitrate's accumulating in the plant. You'd get that poor, hungry, scungy sort of first or second calver who's not competing well against the other girls or bullies, and nobody's thought to give her a bit of carbohydrate or something to slow things down in the rumen. So she races onto a pasture that, well, we stick our urea on when it's not raining, so they haven't left it 6 weeks, it's probably been only a couple of weeks. So they hoover it, she hoovers up this grass, and then she finds she can't breathe because her red cells won't carry oxygen.
Okay, second question. Just got through this. Second
Not from
question
water
is-
though.
It's due, I'm leading up to
No, the cow, that's not.
Yeah, what it does in water. So the second question is, would your tester test milk?
I don't know.
Nitrate
I would
levels.
doubt it because it's an optical sensor with UV light, so too much sediment or shit on the lens would muck up the reading, so I think not. But because you're in this game, people come to you, and surprisingly, a glimmer of hope came from the farming sector. And so there was a farmer in South Canterbury who emailed me, and we had this week, had a 2-hour conversation. And he's pretty clued up on cattle nutrition, and he is making some suggestions where we're not going to solve the problem, but we can improve our lot. If we feed our cows more intelligently, take them off the high protein pasture, which we're fixated on. New Zealand's got to be pasture only dairy farming. If we chuck in some maize silage or carbohydrate and balance the ration, instead of the protein that's not needed being passed out as ammonium in the urine, we can turn it into product. Actually, then our cows can produce more milk for less cows and produce less nitrate per cow. So, I always get attacked from my farming family friends and vet friends who make their money in the industry. Pete, we're sick of your bloody whinging, give us some answers. And here is a little bit of daylight. We're not going to solve it, but maybe we can get the same gross margin per farm and cut the nitrate somewhat. So, it's an area of thought that I'm investigating. I've ordered the bloody definitive book from England, and I want to have a bit more reading.
The third question, why we were leading up to is how many litres of milk, how many litres of water to make 1 litre of milk?
Well, virtual water's a wee bit like all the other models. You've got to take it with a bit of a pinch of salt.
Right.
But Mike Joy would suggest 84,000 litres of water makes 1 litre of milk in Canterbury, because that's how much water we need to dilute the nitrate back to where it should be.
With the milk testing?
Sorry?
You see where I'm heading then? If we can test the milk, the nitrate levels that people are drinking,
Well,
this is how we can
ironically,
whack the public in the head.
Ironically, the dairy factories are having a problem with too much nitrate in the milk now. And ironically, on our pasture-only farming, through us being locked into, fixated into one mindset of cattle nutrition, according to this South Canterbury farmer, I have to verify it, apparently Fonterra is importing $16,000 per farm of lactose to make the milk powder come up to spec.
950,
No, it permeates.
9,500 tonnes
Yeah.
imported.
Yeah.
The permeate, into New Zealand.
Yeah.
What? Yeah.
From South America and all
From
over
coming
the
from
place.
South America and America. We're importing it into New Zealand to stick it in our milk to lift the protein level up.
It's between 80 and 100
Can you
milligrams.
explain, I've read it, I've seen it in Fonterra's, in their writings, why are they stripping the nutraceuticals out of our milk, and what Alan was saying, they're replacing it with permate?
Oh, well-
Where do the nutraceuticals go to?
Well-
What does it
Money.
do?
What is the purpose of a corporate? You do your MBA. The purpose of a corporate is to make a profit.
Yep, yep.
So if you can take the most valuable part out of the milk and sell it at a super markup, then you can give the shit
Waste and-
stuff to other people and charge the same price. That's why they're doing it.